Okay, so this is the first video and it's based on essay writing. We're basically going to go over formatting and communicating clearly and then respecting the author, genre, and period. Actually, in the other way around. So let's go to the full slides. I wanted to start by talking about fiction versus nonfiction. A lot of you in your essays, I've mentioned this quite a few times in class, but I think it isn't clearly communicated during class. So I want to make sure to get to it now. When you refer to these short stories, you have to use the word short story. You can't say novel, you can't say article, because those are totally different types of text. So our first type of text was Mother Tongue by Amy Tan. In that case, that was a memoir, that was nonfiction. So you could have said memoir when you referred to that one in your essay. The rest of the texts that we've used in this class, other than the analytical journal articles, some of them were journal articles writing about the short stories we were reading, but most of them have been short stories. Short stories are fiction and they're between the word range of 1,500 to 30,000 words. They're usually pretty short. It's pretty clear when you're reading a short story. Novellas are short novels, and they range in 30,000 to 50,000 words, and novels are longer fiction, 50,000 to 350,000 words. So when you're analyzing something, a text, you need to use the correct type. You need to use the correct word to refer to it. Otherwise, it's very confusing for your reader. If they are reading your essay and you call a short story an article, they're going to think you're talking about nonfiction. Clearly, that is not true. And just to make sure everybody's clear, fiction, it means that it's invented by the author. It's in the author's mind. Nothing really happened in the real world. Maybe the author is inspired by things happening in the real world, but it didn't really happen. Nonfiction is it really happened, or it's a true story or a thought from the author. Maybe it's philosophy. Philosophy isn't fiction. Philosophy is thought put down on the page, right? So that would be nonfiction. Okay, so there are different fiction genres. When you're analyzing short stories, or fiction, you want to make sure you're referring to the correct genre. You don't want to call something Gothic when it isn't Gothic. You don't want to call something magical realism when it's actually realism. So we read magical realism when we read Marquez. We read realism, which is also kind of naturalism, when we read The Yellow Wallpaper. And we read Native American Native American literature inspired by Native American oral tradition when we read some of Sherman Alexi's work. Sherman Alexi's work also fits into the contemporary postmodern period of writing. So that brings us to literary periods. So when you're analyzing fiction, again, this is just fiction, there are different periods of writing. So we have Native American writing, colonial, revolutionary and nationalism, romanticism and transcendentalism, realism, naturalism. Naturalism is kind of seen as a part of realism. The modern period, postmodern period, and we also have African American literature. There's a lot of information on this online if you want to learn more about it. You can. I'm just trying to make sure that when you go into your next semester, you recognize that there are different periods, there are different genres, and there are different types of text. And you refer to them appropriately. If you need help figuring out what that is, then all you need to do is go on Google and ask Professor Google for some help on that. You need to be resourceful on your own and make sure you're referring to everything correctly. Okay, so I'm going to bring up addressing the author in your papers because a lot of you, I'm sorry if you can hear my dog barking in the background. This is bad timing. Oh no. 1 second. All right. So addressing the author. 1 second. Paco, come here. It's okay. Okay, so addressing the author. In your essays, a lot of you have been using the first and last name of the author either through the entire text, or you just use the first name, which you should only use the first time you mention the author. So right here it says first mention, you use the full name of the author. The second time and after, you only use the last name. So the first time you mention Gabriel Garcia Marquez, you put the whole thing, put his whole name, and that should be in your introduction. The second time you refer to him, just call him Marquez. You never ever say the author uses. You know the name of the author, so say Marquez. There's no point in saying the author. In a citation, use the author's last name, not first name and not full name, just the last name and the page number. I put this example here also. I just want to make sure everybody knows. You put the period and punctuation or comma after the citation, not before, unless it's an exclamation point or a question mark that really changes the meaning of the sentence. You want to differentiate the narrator from the author, only in fiction, because like in Mother Tongue, the narrator and the author are the same person. That's just Amy Tan. There's no narrator in nonfiction. So you wouldn't be able to say the narrator of this memoir because the narrator is the author. So in that case, don't worry about it. But in fiction, in short stories, novellas, and novels, you definitely need to differentiate the narrator from the author. The author does while the narrator says, right? The narrator is telling the story, but the author is writing the story. Writing the fiction, writing the fiction narrator telling the story. I spelled that wrong. There shouldn't be the right there. If no one is speaking dialogue in the story, so you can't say the character says, you wouldn't be able to say the senator explains to Laura Farina, because it's only the narrator speaking, you say the narrator explains, and then you provide a quotation. If it's dialogue, then you refer to the person who's speaking in the dialogue, the conversation in the story. So again, the author does. So when you're talking about Marquez's choice to use solitude so much, like Marquez uses solitude in his story to emphasize the human condition, his perspective on the human condition. That's when you refer to Marquez. When you're referring to something in the plot or something that the characters do, or a description of the setting, usually that's the narrator. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry, my dog sees a cat and he is going crazy. Okay, so quotations. If you have a quotation that's 4 lines or less, you can just introduce the quote. You should never start a sentence with a quotation. Quotes should never be floating, is what it's called. So you have a quote that's 4 lines or less, not 4 sentences or less, 4 lines on your paper when it's double spaced with Times New Roman font and 1-inch margins. That's what I mean. So you have to introduce your quote. The narrator explains. And then you provide your quotation and then your citation. And even though this is online, this one did have pages, so you have to put page numbers. Some of them don't have pages, some of them do. You can also embed the quotation into your sentence, but it has to be grammatically sound. It has to work grammatically. So the fate of the senator who had 6 months and 11 days to go before his death is made clear to the reader in the very first line. This accentuates his destiny of finding the woman of his life in those very last moments. So in this case, I embedded the quotation into my sentence. These 2 ways are both fine. This kind of sounds better, embedding quotations, but you don't only want to embed quotations because sometimes you want a longer quote that you can refer to in your analysis a little more closely. So in that case, you would go with introducing the quote. There's also block format. So if you have 4 lines or longer. So if you put your quote here and it takes up 4 lines or more, then you need to put it in this format. You still have to introduce the quote. You don't just start a block quote. You have to put a colon instead of a comma. So you see here, we put a comma. Here we didn't because it fits into the sentence. It's embedded. Here you put a colon. You indent on the left side. I actually indent 0.5 on each side, but here they're indenting only on the left. Oops. And then you don't indent here because this is continuing the paragraph. You should never start a new paragraph after providing a block quote because you need to explain the quote and you need to analyze it. The other difference is that the period in a block quote is at the end of the sentence, not after the citation, and you don't have quotation marks. The quotation marks are only for if it's in your paragraph. In this case, the indentation counts as the quotation marks. There's a lot of information on block quotes online, so you can look that up if you're confused. Okay, transitions. So there are basic transitions, like however, similarly, on the one hand, on the other hand, furthermore. If you don't use anything else and just use these basic transitions, please use them. I mean, it makes your paper sound a lot better, even if they sound elementary. It's better to use them than not use them. So here's a resource you can go to for transitions. It's pretty basic. It explains why you use them and why they work, and it provides some transitions that you can use. It's a good resource. All right, you can go, I put the PowerPoint on the same folder, so you can go back to the PowerPoint and click on that when you want. However, using more meaningful transitions is a better idea. So I was going to show you this website. This is talking about transitioning within a paragraph and then between paragraphs. So when you are explaining your ideas, your reader, you have to think about how your reader is going to understand them in a specific order. You can't just list all of your ideas one after the other in a paragraph. Your paragraph is one succinct point, and you are supporting an argument that you put in your topic sentence. So in this case, the person wrote, the main character displays strength and courage throughout the story. He shows fear and apprehension when he encounters the antagonist. So this is kind of confusing because in this case, the person says strength and courage. Here, they say the character shows fear and apprehension. Your reader's going to be like, whoa, this is pretty hypocritical, right? Or contradictory. You have one thing, strength and courage here, you have fear and apprehension here. That doesn't make any sense. So you need to provide a transition. So the revision is, the main character displays strength and courage throughout the story. However, he shows fear and apprehension when he encounters the antagonist. In this case, a basic transition, like however, is very useful. So you're using the transition in this case to help to show the contrast between the two ideas while also connecting them. All right, in this case, the person's using for example. In the novel, there are many tragic events that take place. The prince's untimely death occurs 2 days before the wedding. So instead of just saying this, they add for example. For example, the prince's untimely death occurs 2 days before the wedding. It just helps your reader see that this is an example of what the last sentence was saying. You're always trying to think of how do I most clearly express my ideas to my reader. Always try to put yourself in your reader's head. What question might they have between this sentence and this sentence? How can I answer it using a transition? That's the way you should be thinking when you're editing your work. You also need to transition between paragraphs. Your paragraphs each should have one main idea, and that main idea is expressed in the topic sentence. When you move from one paragraph to the next, it can be confusing for your reader. Are you continuing that same main idea, and you're just creating a new paragraph so that you can go over new examples and not confuse your reader? Or are you moving to a totally different main idea? So here, we have two examples. We have paragraph 1 and paragraph 2. These are the two topic sentences. The author's work includes many examples of symbolism. Paragraph 2, in the story, multiple themes are present. So you want to look at your topic sentences in your entire essay. Do they kind of work together, or are they very choppy and different? These two are very choppy and different. This is the first sentence of paragraph 1, or body paragraph 1, and this is the first sentence of body paragraph 2. Revision. The author's work includes many examples of symbolism. And then paragraph 2 topic sentence is, in addition to the symbolism in the text, multiple themes are present. So you're connecting them. You're showing that they're different. You're going to a new main supporting idea for your thesis, because the thesis must have something to do with themes and symbolism, but they're showing how they connect. This is really important for your reader to understand the flow of your ideas in your paragraphs. But again, you could have 2 paragraphs on symbolism, in which case you would say, not only is there symbolism regarding water, but there's also symbolism with fire. Marquez uses fire a lot in these stories as well, and then you go on and talk about fire. But you're connecting the 2 paragraphs by showing that they both discuss symbolism, but in different ways. And here are some more examples. This person is going through their ideas in a logical way. So in the book, many loud sounds prevented the characters from sleeping. And I'm assuming in this paragraph, they gave examples of the characters sleeping. And then in the second paragraph, they said, the characters were unable to embark on their journey the next day. So in paragraph 1, they gave these examples. And then in paragraph 2, you add, as a result of their lack of sleep, the characters were unable to go start their journey. You're showing that the 2 paragraphs are going over 2 different parts of the story, but they're connected in some way. Oops, they're connected like this. You can't assume your reader knows how they're connected. Okay. So these are some basic transitions that you can use. These are more for in the paragraph. There are tons of them. And you want to use more meaningful transitions when you're transitioning between paragraphs. Longer transitions, not just however, not just first, second, third. I want to see meaningful transitions like this. Like, not only does Marquez use symbolism to emphasize solitude, but he also uses extensive imagery. Not only does Marquez show magical realism through his plot, but through the emotions of the reader, through triggering emotions of the reader. So you use meaningful transitions. Okay, let's go back. Essay titles. As I mentioned in class last time, and a lot of you did a lot better with this in your drafts, but some of you still did the boring analysis of beyond death, constant beyond love. You don't want your thesis, your title to be boring, because you're trying to engage your reader. You're trying to get their attention and tell them what the theme of your essay is, so that they can say, oh, this works, this is what I was looking for. Or they can say, no, this isn't exactly what I was looking for, but I'll read it anyway because it seems interesting. So samples of titles from my work have been The Death of the Hero, and this was a thesis that I wrote my senior year of college, and it was about the hero archetype changing after World War I. So I called it The Death of the Hero instead of saying analysis of the hero archetype, because I thought this was more interesting. This is another title for an essay I wrote last year, The Veil of Rot, Understanding Arma's Use of Myth. So you can provide a creative title and then explain what you're doing in your essay as well. This is for literary analysis, and these were for other types of writing, like writing for philosophy and research. The Human Right to Literacy in Question, and Dissolving Destructive Polarizations by Recognizing Primary Literacies in the Discussion of Literacy as a Human Right. So this one's a little longer, but it explains exactly what I'm doing in that paper. Literary analysis titles can be a bit more creative than other types that you might write in a sociology or philosophy class. And again, always capitalize words other than articles. When I say capitalize words, I mean capitalize the first letter of the word, not the entire word. So if it's the first word, you always have to capitalize it no matter what it is. If it's a, the, anything, you always have to capitalize. If it's an article, a pronoun, or a short preposition in the rest of it, short preposition would be like by, or an article would be a, you don't need to capitalize those unless they're the first word in the title. All right, let's talk about works cited. So the works cited page, remember, should always be in alphabetical order. We talked about that. This is not in alphabetical order, so if I'm talking about both of these, I would need to flip them around, right? And then if you have, for example, an article or a short story that we found online, then this is how you would cite it. Put the last name of the author, then the first in the middle. Here, Sir Thomas Wyatt, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. You put the title of the short story in quotation marks. If it were a novel or another type of, like a movie, you would put it in italics. But an article, a short story, a poem, these are all in quotation marks. You put the date, if provided, the date that it was published, if provided. Put the translator, translated by, you just put trans, Gregory Rabassa. Baruch, you put the basic website, baruchcuny.edu. Here, this is the basic website from this one. And then you put the date, you put the medium, so the web, and then the date that you accessed it. The day, the month, and then the year. So if you have an in-text citation after a quote, which you should have, with only one author by one work by one author, so maybe you're only looking at one of Marquez's stories in your essay, then you just put Marquez and then the page number. Even if it's online, it probably has a page number. Let's look at the one, let's try to find it. Here, we have pages here. This is page 1, this is page 2. Even though it doesn't have a page number here, you can still see that it has page numbers. Actually, there's page numbers right here. If it's like this, clearly there are no page numbers, and in which case, don't worry about page numbers. Okay? So if you have 2 texts or 3 works by one author in your works cited page, again, those would be all starting with Marquez, the works cited page, but you would alphabetize it by the title of the story. You would have to put an abbreviation in the in-text citation after you provide a quote. You put an abbreviation of the story title and then the page number. Or if there is no page number, just the abbreviation of the story title. Okay, so here are 2 really good resources. Here's one. You could print this out and keep it with you for your English classes that work with MLA format. And this is the other, OWL Purdue, or Purdue OWL. So this is the one that we've used a lot in this class. So remember to use those resources. I don't like to use EasyBib because unless I have a huge project with 20 works, because you just want to make sure you're getting all the information right. So just use the information that you have from that website. Finally, I wanted to make sure that in your future classes you are resourceful on your own. Try not to go to your teacher before you do any research on your own. If you're confused, if you can't find any information about which styling guide you're supposed to use on the assignment sheet or on the syllabus, then you can go to your professor and say, am I supposed to be using MLA for this? And then they'll say yes, or no, you're supposed to be using APA or something like that. If they say APA, then you have to look up APA formatting guide on Purdue OWL. It's that simple. And then you can find it all on your own. Go to Google and find your answers on Google. Again, do as much research on your questions as you possibly can without going to your professor. And then in the end, if you really are confused, then you go to your professor. I would say before that, go to a writing center and ask for help, and then go to your professor. Okay? So again, be resourceful on your own. You can find those answers by yourself. I did. I managed to do it in college, and I know you can. All right. I hope this was helpful. And now you have to go to the quiz that's posted on Husky CT under this folder and complete that quiz. Thank you.